Today I'm going to be talking about how to create a drop shadow in Photoshop. It's something that can be really helpful with making images that you add on to a different background blend in better. So the first thing I'm doing is trying to isolate the object that I'm going to be moving, which in this case is a squirrel. And I figure it's winter time and everyone's cold, so I know I'd rather be on a beach, so I thought maybe this squirrel would like to be on a beach as well. The second thing I'm doing is I'm adding a couple of adjustment layers onto the squirrel to try and get it to blend into the image a little bit more. So basically I'm adding more brightness and a little bit more of a blue hue. And then I go in and select the squirrel and select the inverse and then delete everything that's not the squirrel off of the two adjustment layers. After that, it's important to merge all your adjustment layers down onto the original image so that it's all one image for creating the shadow. This leaves us with an image that looks fine, but a lot more like a sticker placed on top of an image than actually a part of the image. I would not believe that this squirrel is actually on this beach. So the way we can try to fix that is by adding a drop shadow. Start by selecting the layer that you'd like to add a shadow to, then go to the Layer Effects menu, the little F at the bottom. Select Drop Shadow from the menu. This brings up a menu of choices for our drop shadow. If you move the distance slider, you'll be able to actually see your drop shadow. We can see that this does not look like a very realistic shadow. We can make the shadow look more realistic by adjusting the settings. Spread makes the shadow look sharper, and so we don't want that, as shadows are typically a little softer around the edges. We get this softness by adjusting the size. You want the softness to try and match the other shadows that are already in the photo. So you adjust until you think you have a pretty good general shape for your shadow. After this, I decided to adjust the angle just to get a better feel of where it would be, although this is not where it will end up. Clicking on this small black box will allow you to change the color of your shadow. When you click it, you should be able to get an eyedropper tool when you hover over your image. You want to try and get a color that is similar to the color of the shadows already present in the picture. So I use my eyedropper tool here a couple times until I get a color that I like. After that, you want to set blend mode to multiply to where it looks a lot more like a shadow. Next, right-click the FX that has appeared to the right of your layer. Then select Create Layer from the drop-down menu. This will put your drop shadow on a different layer that you can manipulate free of the original image. Right-click on the thumbnail of your shadow layer and choose Select Pixels. From there, you can either right-click on the image or go up to the Edit tab and select Free Transform. This will allow you to resize, squash, or stretch your image. After you've done that, go up to the Edit tab and select Transform. Play with the different tools to get a shadow look that you like. Skew, Distort, and Perspective all worked really well for me. You want to try and manipulate the shadow to where it looks like the shadows already present in the image. This usually means stretching it out and adjusting it at a certain angle that is similar to the other shadows in the picture. I had to mess with the angle a lot before I got one that I was happy with. And even then, it's not going to be perfect. You can go back and edit this in different ways, like I will later in this video, but as long as you get it somewhat similar, it will usually look alright. Although it's not as obvious in this image, most shadows get lighter and more fuzzy as they get farther away from the object that's casting them. We want to try to duplicate this with our Photoshop shadow. To start, right-click on your shadow layer and duplicate the image. I renamed it Squirrel Shadow 2 just to make it a little easier. Next, hide your original shadow to where we're just focusing on the one you just created. With your new layer selected, go to the Filter menu, go down to Blur, and select Gaussian Blur. Gaussian Blur blurs the outside of your image first, so you can get the outside fuzzy without affecting the inside. You can go really intense or really subtle with this effect, so choose whatever you think is right for the rest of the shadows in your image. For this image, the shadows don't have that much of a gradient since the light is so intense, so I went with something really small, but that still shows sort of a difference. Next, create a layer mask for your shadow by clicking the button that's a rectangle with a little circle in it on your layers menu. Then we're going to use the gradient tool, which looks like a gradient on your toolbar. We want the gradient to go black to white or white to black depending on the direction of your shadow. If you get there and you realize that you've done it the wrong way, you can always just select the reverse box up on the toolbar. it's going to have you drawing a little line that will indicate the direction of your gradient. This is a little difficult to get right off the bat, but I got it in a few tries. And you just want the part of your shadow farthest away from your actual object to fade away and the part closest to your object to stay. Next, you'll want to click to show both of your shadow layers so we can adjust the opacity of both of them. For your top gradient layer, you want to set that somewhere between 20 and 40%, depending on, like everything else, the other shadows in the picture. For your original darker shadow, you want to set it somewhere between 70 and 90 to 100%. I think I ended up setting mine at like 89. And that will sort of adjust the color and also the effect that the fade has on the shadow. So again, you just want it to look like the other shadows in the piece. So for this one, I wanted it to stay pretty dark and pretty tight. After you've got it looking the way you like it, right-click on the top shadow layer and select Merge Down to put both shadows on the same layer. At this point, I liked the general shape and angle of my shadow, but I didn't really like the way it wrapped around the feet. It looked unrealistic. So I used the smudge tool set on a pretty high strength, 45%, to maintain sort of the sharpness and the color, to adjust the way that just the legs and the feet shadows wrapped around there. After that, it did seem to lose a little bit of its intensity, which for the base of the shadow is really important. So I went back in with the brush at just like a really low opacity gray, and added that in there until it regained its sharpness, and used the blur and smudge tools to kind of get it blended back in. So I know this is sort of cheating since it's not a shadow, but it's something else that can really help pull the image all together when you're creating composite images, and that's adding an overlay to sort of regulate the colors of the whole image. So what I did is I created a new layer, and then I selected a color, sort of this seafoamy green to match the beach feel, and painted the whole image with that. And then I changed the blend mode to overlay. And that kind of regulated the colors throughout the whole image, made them all look uniform, and made it look as if it was the same image. Obviously, this isn't a perfect science. I don't think I'd really be fooling anyone with this picture, especially after I added the hat. But it definitely looks a lot more convincing than it did before. And even if it doesn't make your images infallible, it definitely does take them up a notch. And the skills that it takes to do this in Photoshop can translate really well to other uses, both practical and a little more fun. Practical being like adding an object or even a person, if you get good enough at it, to an image, and fun being like putting a little hat on this squirrel. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something, and I hope you can use that knowledge to help improve your images a little bit. Thanks again, and good luck.